The transport ship touched down on New Terminus with a shudder that rattled through the hull. Deho grabbed his single bag and made his way to the exit ramp. The air outside hit him like a wall of heat and dust. This frontier world was nothing like Earth. Nothing like the clean military stations he'd served on for 15 years. He stepped onto the landing pad and looked around. New Terminus was a mess of buildings that didn't match, thrown together by a dozen different alien species who decided this rock was worth settling. Market stalls lined the streets between proper structures. The smell of strange foods and stranger creatures filled his nose. Above, 3 moons hung in a purple sky that told him he was very far from home. Deho had been to many worlds during his service with the Terran Defense Corps. He'd fought pirates, negotiated with hostile aliens, and saved colonies from disasters. None of that mattered anymore. 6 months ago, he'd disobeyed a direct order from command. They'd told him to bomb a facility that held enemy combatants. He'd seen the thermal scans. There were children inside, civilians being used as shields. He'd refused the order and gone in on foot instead. Saved 200 innocents. Lost 3 of his own men doing it. Command didn't care about the innocents. They cared about the disobeyed order. Exile was better than prison, they'd said. Deho wasn't sure he agreed. He walked into the city proper, keeping his head down but his eyes sharp. Years of military training didn't just disappear because someone took away your uniform. He noticed everything. The way that Velkari merchant watched passers-by with 3 eyes instead of focusing on his goods. The human woman in the alley who stood too straight, too alert. Probably security or maybe a criminal. The patterns of foot traffic that told him where the good areas were and where trouble lived. Deho found a cheap room in a building that leaned slightly to one side. The Grelian landlord didn't ask questions. Just took his credits and gave him a key card. The room was small. A bed, a table, a bathroom that barely fit his frame. It would do. He'd slept in worse places. He unpacked his bag. Civilian clothes, some basic supplies, and hidden in a false bottom. His combat knife and a small pistol. A soldier could take away the uniform, but Deho would never stop being what he was. A warrior, a protector, someone who made the hard choices when everyone else looked away. There was a knock at his door 3 hours later. Deho had been expecting it. He opened the door to find a human woman standing there. She was small, wore expensive clothes that didn't fit this dusty world, and had eyes that calculated everything they saw. "Deho," she said. It wasn't a question. Depends who's asking. Someone who knows you did the right thing 6 months ago. Someone who thinks exile is a waste of a good soldier. She glanced down the hallway. "Can I come in?" Deho stepped aside. The woman entered and he closed the door behind her. She didn't sit, just stood in the center of the room looking at him like she was measuring his worth. "My name isn't important," she said. "What's important is that I represent certain interests within human space. Interests that don't always align with official policy." "Intelligence," Deho said flatly. "Something like that." She pulled out a small data chip. "We have a mission. It requires someone with your particular skills. Someone who thinks for themselves. Someone who isn't bound by the normal chain of command anymore. I'm done fighting. This isn't about fighting. It's about preventing a war." She held up the chip. "The Velkari Empire is planning something. We don't know what exactly, but our sources say it's big. Something that could destabilize the entire sector. We need information from their royal palace. Specifically from their military command servers." Deho crossed his arms. "You want me to break into an alien imperial palace and steal classified data?" "Yes." "That's insane. Their security would tear apart anyone who tried. Their security is designed to stop other aliens. Creatures who think in predictable patterns, who follow logical approaches." She smiled slightly. "You're human. You improvise. You adapt. You do things that don't make sense to alien minds. That's why you're perfect for this. And if I refuse, then you stay here on New Terminus drinking away your pension until some bounty hunter recognizes you and decides that dishonored soldiers make easy targets." She placed the chip on his table. "Or you do something that matters. Something that could save millions of lives." Deho stared at the chip. He told himself he was done. That he'd served enough, sacrificed enough. But the woman was right about one thing. Sitting in this room waiting to die wasn't living. It was just existing. "What's the timeline?" he asked. 2 weeks. There's a narrow window when the princess will be away from the palace for a diplomatic function. Security will be lighter. That's your chance to get in and out. Princess Yura. Third in line for the Velkari throne. She'll be off-world for exactly 48 hours. The mission parameters are all on the chip. Study them. Memorize them. Then destroy the chip. The woman moved to the door. You'll receive equipment and support as needed. But understand this is unofficial. If you're caught, no one will acknowledge you exist. Story of my life, Deho muttered. The woman paused at the door. One more thing. This mission requires precision and stealth. No complications, no deviations, no emotional attachments. Get in, get the data, get out. Can you do that? Deho thought about the last mission. About the children he'd saved. About the order he'd refused. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Good. She opened the door. Someone will contact you in 3 days with your first briefing. Welcome back to the war, soldier. Then she was gone, leaving Deho alone with a data chip and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. He picked up the chip and inserted it into his personal terminal. Files bloomed across the screen. Schematics of the Velkari Palace, guard rotations, information on the royal family. And there, a photo of Princess Yura. She was beautiful even by human standards. Tall and elegant with features that were alien but somehow captivating. Her species had smooth purple skin and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. According to the file, she was brilliant, educated in 7 systems and known for her progressive views that often clashed with her father's traditional policies. Deho stared at her image for a long moment. Then he closed the file and began studying the palace schematics. He had 2 weeks to plan an impossible infiltration. 2 weeks to prepare for a mission that could prevent a war. 2 weeks before everything changed. He didn't know it yet, but the woman's warning about complications would prove prophetic. Princess Yura would return to the palace early. She would see him during his reconnaissance, and she would make him an offer that would shatter every carefully laid plan he'd made. But that was still days away. For now, Deho focused on what he knew best. Strategy, tactics, the careful calculation of risk and reward. He studied late into the night as the 3 moons of New Terminus moved across the purple sky. Somewhere in the distance, a ship lifted off with a roar that shook the windows. The exile had found his purpose again. The warrior had his mission. Everything else would have to wait. Part 2. The Unexpected Encounter. 5 days had passed since Deho received the mission. He'd spent every waking hour studying the palace layout, memorizing guard patterns and learning everything he could about Velkari culture. The briefing contact had come and gone, leaving him with equipment hidden in various locations around the city. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Tonight, Deho was gathering intelligence at a place called the Crystal Gardens. It was an expensive establishment in the diplomatic quarter where various species came to socialize, make deals, and pretend they weren't constantly scheming against each other. The kind of place where information flowed as freely as the exotic drinks. Deho wore civilian clothes that marked him as a traitor. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. He'd learned long ago that the best way to observe was to be forgettable. He sat at the bar nursing a drink he had no intention of finishing, watching the room through the reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. The gardens lived up to their name. Real crystal formations grew from the floor and ceiling, glowing with soft bioluminescent light. Plants from a dozen worlds filled every corner, creating private spaces where deals could be made away from prying eyes. Music played, something with too many notes that human ears couldn't quite process comfortably. Deho had been there for an hour when he noticed the disturbance. Not obvious, nothing most people would catch, but he saw the way the Velkari security team positioned themselves near the eastern entrance. Saw the careful sweep of the room they performed. Someone important was arriving. Then she entered, and Deho's breath caught in his throat. Princess Yura moved through the crowd like she owned it. She wore a flowing garment that shifted colors as she walked, and her purple skin seemed to glow in the crystal light. But it wasn't her beauty that froze him. It was the fact that she was supposed to be off-world. The mission timeline depended on her being gone. Her presence here meant either his intelligence was wrong, or something had changed. Deho forced himself to look away, to study his drink like it was the most interesting thing in the room. But he kept her in his peripheral vision, tracking her movement through the crowd. She was meeting with someone, a tall alien with too many arms and a reputation for selling weapons to anyone with credits. He watched the meeting carefully. The princess seemed tense, her body language suggesting disagreement. Good. If she was having problems with her suppliers, that could be useful information. He filed it away and prepared to leave. He'd seen enough, learned enough. Time to extract before someone noticed him watching. But as he stood, he made the mistake of glancing directly at her. And she was looking right back at him. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment, neither moved. Daeho felt like she could see straight through him, through his disguise, through his carefully constructed cover story, right down to his intentions. The princess's expression changed from casual interest to something more focused, more curious. Then she smiled and started walking toward him. Every instinct Daeho had screamed at him to leave, to disappear into the crowd and abort the evening's reconnaissance. But running would draw more attention than staying. So he stood his ground and waited as one of the most powerful women in the Velkari Empire approached him with clear intent. "You're human," she said when she reached him. Her voice was melodic with an accent that made standards sound like poetry. "Guilty," Daeho replied, keeping his tone light and casual. "I don't see many humans in places like this. Most of your kind prefer the lower districts." She gestured to the seat beside him. "May I?" "It's your world, Your Highness." Yura raised one elegant eyebrow. "You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are. And yet you didn't bow. Didn't avert your eyes, didn't show any of the deference my people expect." She sat down, studying him with those ancient eyes. "Interesting," Daeho shrugged. "Where I come from, we don't bow much. No offense intended, none taken. I find your human customs refreshing." She ordered a drink from the bartender with a gesture. "What brings you to New Terminus? Business?" "Something like that." How mysterious. Yura's drink arrived, something that sparkled and changed colors. She took a sip, never taking her eyes off him. "You know, I've been studying humans lately. Your species fascinates me, is that so?" "Oh yes, you're so new to the galactic stage. Yet you've already made such an impact. Your military defeated the Krathani raiders last year. Your traders are out competing established merchants. Your diplomats are reshaping alliances that have stood for centuries." She leaned closer. "Tell me, what makes humans so special?" Daeho knew danger when he heard it. This wasn't casual conversation. She was probing, testing, looking for something. But he couldn't just walk away now without confirming her suspicions. So he played along. "We're not special," he said. "We just don't give up easily." But that's exactly what makes you special. Every other species knows when they're beaten. They calculate odds, assess risks, and surrender when logic dictates. But humans, she smiled. Humans keep fighting even when the math says they should die. They improvise. They adapt. They do things that make no sense to logical minds. Sounds like you've done your research. I have. And do you know what conclusion I've reached? She set down her drink and turned to face him fully. I've concluded that humans are either the most dangerous species in the galaxy or the most valuable allies. Possibly both. Daeho met her gaze steadily. And which do you think we are? I haven't decided yet. That's why I'm so interested in getting to know more about your kind. She paused and something shifted in her expression, something more personal, more direct, in getting to know you specifically. I'm nobody special, Your Highness. Yura. Please. And I don't believe that for a second. She reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the bar. Her skin was warm, warmer than he expected. I watched you before I approached. You were watching everything, everyone. Assessing threats, calculating exits, reading body language. That's not the behavior of a simple trader. Daeho's heart rate increased, but he kept his expression neutral. Habit from growing up rough. Perhaps. Yura withdrew her hand. Or perhaps you're exactly what I think you are. Someone interesting. Someone different from the usual boring politicians and merchants I'm forced to entertain. She stood, smoothing her garment. One night. That's all I need. Spend one night with me. Show me what makes humanity so remarkable. Daeho blinked. Of all the things he'd expected, that wasn't one of them. I'm sorry, what? You heard me. One night. No politics, no games, no expectations beyond honest conversation, and perhaps something more if the chemistry is right. She smiled at his shocked expression. Don't look so surprised. I'm a princess, not a child. I make my own choices, including who I spend my time with. Your Highness, I don't think that's a good idea. Yura, she corrected again. And why not? Are you married? Committed to someone? No, but then what's the problem? She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something sweet and exotic. Are you afraid of me? Should I be? Probably. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. But I don't think you're the type to let fear stop you from doing what interests you. And I interest you. I can tell. She was right, and that was the problem. Daeho found himself drawn to her in a way that was completely inappropriate for his mission. She was intelligent, direct, and had a confidence that came from being born to power but choosing to think for herself. Under different circumstances in a different life, he might have said yes. But these weren't different circumstances. He was here to spy on her family, to steal from her people, to potentially undermine everything she'd been born into. Getting involved with her would be the worst possible complication. I'm flattered, he said carefully, but I'm not the right person for what you're looking for. Let me be the judge of that. Yura pulled out a small device and pressed something on its surface. I've just sent you the address of a private residence I keep in the city. Come tonight at midnight if you change your mind. If you don't show, I'll know you're not as brave as I think you are. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her security team falling in behind her. Daeho watched her go, his mind racing. This was bad. This was a complication he couldn't afford. The mission required stealth, careful planning, and absolutely no personal entanglements. But as he looked at the address she'd sent him, glowing on his communication device, he couldn't quite bring himself to delete it. Daeho left the Crystal Gardens and walked through the night streets of New Terminus. He needed to think to clear his head to remember why he was here. The mission was everything. Preventing a war meant more than his personal desires or curiosity about a fascinating woman who happened to be exactly the wrong person at exactly the wrong time. He would delete the address. He would continue his reconnaissance as planned. He would maintain professional distance and complete his objective. That's what he told himself as he walked under the 3 moons of New Terminus, trying to ignore the fact that he'd already memorized the address and was calculating the best route to reach it by midnight. Part 3: Complications. Escalate Daeho didn't go to the address that night. He went back to his room, destroyed the message, and spent the next day continuing his mission planning. He told himself he'd made the right choice, professional, smart, the only logical decision, but Princess Yura didn't seem to care about his decision. She appeared the next evening while he was observing a supply route to the palace. Just appeared as if by magic, walking along the same street he was using for surveillance. She wore simpler clothes this time, less royal, almost normal, but there was no hiding who she was. Not from him. Following me, Your Highness? Daeho asked as she fell into step beside him. Yura, and no, I live in this city. I'm allowed to walk wherever I choose. She glanced at him with amusement. You didn't come last night. I had other plans. Liar. You stayed in your room, alone. She smiled at his surprised look. I may be curious about humans, but I'm not foolish. I had you checked out after our meeting. Daeho, formerly of the Terran Defense Corps, dishonorably discharged for disobeying orders, currently living in a cheap room in the lower districts under the name Kang. Daeho's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed weapon at his back. Yura noticed and held up her hands. Relax, I'm not going to turn you in. If I wanted you arrested, you'd already be in custody. She gestured to a small cafe. Buy me a drink and let me explain? Every tactical instinct told Daeho to run. His cover was blown, mission compromised, time to abort and extract. But something in Yura's expression stopped him. She didn't look threatening. She looked curious. And underneath that, tired. They sat at an outdoor table where Daeho could watch the street. Yura ordered something local. He ordered water. You're not what I expected, Yura said after the drinks arrived. When I learned there was a dishonored human soldier on New Terminus, I thought you'd be bitter. Broken, but you're not. You're still fighting, still planning something. I can see it in your eyes. What do you want from me? The same thing I wanted before. One night. A chance to understand humans through someone who actually matters, not the sanitized diplomats and merchants I usually meet. She sipped her drink. But now I'm also curious about why you're really here. New Terminus is a strange place for a soldier to choose for exile. Maybe I like strange places. Or maybe you're working for someone. Maybe human intelligence sent you here for a reason. She leaned forward. Are you here to spy on my family? Daeho kept his expression neutral. That's a serious accusation. It's a logical conclusion. Human-Velkari relations are tense. My father is planning something, though he won't tell me what. And suddenly an experienced human operative appears in the same city where our royal palace is located. She smiled sadly. I'm not stupid, Deho. I know how these games work. If you know all that, why are you talking to me instead of having your guards arrest me? Because I don't want you arrested. Yura looked around, making sure no one was listening. Because I think whatever my father is planning is wrong. Because I've spent years trying to reform our empire from within and getting nowhere. And because maybe, just maybe, you're here to stop whatever madness he's preparing. Deho studied her carefully. This could be a trap. An elaborate game to make him reveal his mission. But something in her voice rang true. The frustration, the weariness, the desperate hope that someone might actually listen. Why would you betray your own family? He asked quietly. It's not betrayal to prevent atrocities. My father talks about Velkari supremacy, about our divine right to rule lesser species. But I've traveled. I've seen other cultures. I know we're not superior, just older. And I know that the path my father is taking leads to war, unnecessary war that will kill billions. She met his eyes. If you're here to stop that, I want to help. Before Deho could respond, he noticed movement. 3 figures approaching fast from different angles. Not palace guards. These moved like hunters, like assassins. Down, he shouted, grabbing Yura and pulling her under the table as the first energy bolt scorched the air where her head had been. The cafe erupted in chaos. People screaming, running, diving for cover. Deho pulled his concealed pistol and fired back, hitting one attacker in the shoulder. But there were 2 more and they were spreading out to flank their position. Stay down, Deho ordered Yura. His mind raced through tactical options. The table provided minimal cover. The street was too open. They needed to move, but the attackers had good positions. One of the assassins said something in Velkari. Yura gasped. What? Deho asked. They're not here for you. They're here for me. My brother Taman sent them. She looked terrified. He wants me dead. That changed everything. This wasn't about Deho's cover being blown. This was internal royal politics. Succession struggles. The kind of violent power plays that toppled empires. And Yura was the target. Deho made a decision. He grabbed Yura's hand and ran. They burst from behind the table as another energy bolt struck the ground where they'd been. Deho fired backward without looking, relying on instinct and training to make the shots count. 1 attacker went down. The other 2 pursued. He pulled Yura through the panicked crowd using the chaos as cover. His mind mapped the surrounding streets from his reconnaissance. There was an alley 2 blocks east that led to a maintenance tunnel system. If they could reach it, they'd have a chance. Can you run? He asked Yura. Yes, they ran. Behind them, the assassins gave chase. Energy bolts burned through the air, striking buildings and sending debris flying. Deho returned fire, trying to slow them down without stopping. His human endurance was kicking in now. The ability to maintain speed and focus even under extreme stress, something most alien species couldn't match. They reached the alley. Deho found the maintenance hatch and wrenched it open with strength born from adrenaline. Inside! Yura dropped into the tunnel without hesitation. Deho followed, pulling the hatch closed behind them just as another bolt struck the metal surface. They were in darkness now, lit only by emergency strips along the tunnel walls. This way, Deho said, leading her deeper into the system. He could hear the assassins trying to open the hatch above. They had minutes at best. They moved through the tunnels at a fast pace. Yura kept up without complaint, which impressed him. Royalty didn't usually handle sudden combat well, but she was tough, focused, adapting to the situation instead of panicking. After 10 minutes of twisting through the maintenance system, Deho found what he was looking for. A secondary exit that led to the lower districts. He checked the street above carefully before climbing out, then helped Yura up. They were in an area of warehouses and industrial buildings. Quiet, dark, safe for the moment. Yura leaned against a wall, catching her breath. You saved my life. You said your brother sent those assassins? Taman. He's second in line for the throne. I'm third. He's always seen me as a threat, but I didn't think he'd actually try to kill me. She looked shaken. Our father doesn't know. He can't know. Taman has too much influence with the military. Deho processed this information. The mission had just gotten exponentially more complicated. But it had also presented an opportunity. Princess Yura needed protection. She needed someone she could trust. And she'd already said she wanted to help stop whatever her father was planning. Come with me, he said. I know a safe place. Where? My room. It's not much, but it's secure. And no one knows about it except me. He looked at her seriously. But if you come, you need to trust me completely. Can you do that? Yura met his eyes. She was scared, but underneath the fear was determination and trust. She was choosing to trust him despite everything. Yes, she said. I can do that. They made their way carefully through the lower districts, avoiding main streets and security cameras. Daeho's training served them well. He knew how to move unseen, how to blend into shadows, how to read an environment for threats, skills that seemed to amaze Yura as she followed him. They reached his building without incident, climbed the stairs to his floor, entered his small room. Once inside with the door locked, Daeho finally allowed himself to breathe. You're very good at this, Yura said, looking around the sparse room. I was a soldier for 15 years. You learn things. Why were you dishonorably discharged? The records I found were vague. Daeho sat on the edge of his bed. I disobeyed orders. My superiors wanted me to bomb a target. I saw there were civilians inside, children, so I refused and went in on foot instead. Saved the civilians, lost some of my team doing it. He looked at his hands. Command didn't appreciate my initiative. Yura sat beside him. You chose innocent lives over following orders. That's not dishonorable. That's courageous. My superiors didn't see it that way. Then your superiors were wrong. She touched his shoulder gently. Thank you for saving me tonight. You didn't have to, especially since I basically threatened to expose you earlier. You weren't really going to turn me in. No, I wasn't. She smiled. So are you going to tell me why you're really here? Or do I have to keep guessing? Daeho thought about it. His mission was compromised anyway. Yura knew too much, and she'd already offered to help. Maybe it was time to take a chance, to trust someone the way she was trusting him. I'm here to steal classified military data from your father's palace, he said quietly. Data about whatever he's planning. My people think it's big enough to start a war. Yura didn't look surprised. It is. I do part 4. One night changes everything. The night passed slowly in the small room. Daeho gave Yura the bed while he sat in the chair by the window, watching the street below for any signs of pursuit. She didn't sleep much either. They talked in quiet voices, sharing stories about their lives, their worlds, their hopes for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. Yura told him about growing up in the palace, surrounded by luxury but suffocated by tradition, about her mother, who died when she was young, and her father, who'd grown harder and more distant with each passing year, about her education across 7 systems, how she'd seen the galaxy and realized her people's claim to superiority was built on nothing but ancient pride and military might. Daeho told her about Earth, about joining the military to escape poverty, about the friends he'd lost and the lives he'd saved, about the moment he'd chosen conscience over orders and how it had cost him everything he'd worked for, about exile and loneliness and the strange relief of finally being free from a system that valued obedience over morality. They talked until the twin moons set and the first light of dawn crept through the window. Somewhere during those hours, the distance between them had closed. They sat together now, close enough to touch, sharing a connection that went beyond politics or missions or the vast differences between their species. I've never met anyone like you, Yura said softly. Most people I know are so concerned with status and protocol. But you don't care about any of that. You just do what you think is right. It's easier when you don't have anything left to lose. Is that really true? That you have nothing left? She looked at him with those ancient eyes. Or have you just convinced yourself of that to make the loneliness easier? Daeho didn't have an answer for that. As morning fully arrived, they knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Yura's disappearance would be noticed. Questions would be asked. They needed to move forward with the mission before Taemin sent more assassins, or her father locked down the palace. But first, they needed a plan. A real plan, not the solo infiltration Daeho had been preparing for. They spread out his mission files on the small table and began working. The palace security is built in layers, Yura explained, pointing to the schematics. Physical guards, electronic surveillance, biometric scanners, and autonomous defense systems. It's designed to stop any single intruder, no matter how skilled, but not designed to stop someone with legitimate access, Daeho said, seeing where she was going. Exactly. If I'm with you, we can bypass most of the security. My biometrics will open doors, disable alarms, grant access to restricted areas. She traced a route through the palace layout.
The military command servers are here in the Royal Archive.
It's one of the most secure locations in the building. How do we access the servers without triggering alerts? Yura smiled. I have a security bypass code. One of the few advantages of being royal. Even my father can't completely lock me out of palace systems. They worked through the morning, refining their approach, identifying risks, planning contingencies. Deho found himself impressed by Yura's strategic mind. She thought like a soldier, considering variables and adapting to obstacles. The royal education had clearly been thorough. Around midday, Yura's communication device chimed. She looked at it and her expression darkened. My father's security detail. They're looking for me. Someone reported the attack last night. She read the message carefully. They're calling it an attempted kidnapping by human operatives. Taman is spinning this to make humans look like the aggressors. That's smart. Politically useful. Deho cursed. This is going to accelerate whatever your father is planning. We need to move now, tonight. Yura stood, determination replacing fear. I'll send word that I'm safe, that I escaped my captors and need to return to the palace quietly to avoid embarrassment. That will buy us time to get inside before they lock everything down. Are you sure about this? Once we go in, there's no turning back. Yura moved closer to him, placing her hand on his chest. I've never been more sure of anything. My whole life I've watched my family make decisions that hurt people. Decisions based on pride and power instead of wisdom and compassion. This is my chance to actually make a difference, to prevent the suffering my father would cause. She looked up at him. I'm not going to waste it. Deho covered her hand with his. You're either incredibly brave or completely insane. Can't I be both? She smiled, but there was sadness in it. After tonight, everything changes. Win or lose, I'll never be able to return to my old life. The palace, my position, my family, all of it will be gone. We could still find another way, something less risky. There is no other way, not one that works in time. She moved even closer until there was no space between them. I knew what I was choosing when I offered to help you. I'm making peace with it. They stood like that for a long moment. Then Yura reached up and touched his face, tracing the scar along his jaw with gentle fingers. One night, she whispered. That's what I asked for. One night to understand humans, to see what makes them special. I think I'm beginning to understand. What's that? You feel deeply. You commit completely. When you care about something, you give everything to it, even when the logical choice would be to walk away. Her voice was soft. That's terrifying. And beautiful. Deho knew he should step back, should maintain professional distance. The mission was already complicated enough without adding personal feelings to the mix. But he'd been alone for so long, exiled, cut off from everything that mattered. And here was someone who understood, who chose principle over power, who was willing to risk everything for what was right. He kissed her. Soft at first, then deeper as she responded. It was reckless and foolish and exactly what both of them needed in that moment. A connection. A reminder that they were more than just their missions and their duties. They were alive. They were choosing to hope despite everything telling them hope was dangerous. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. That was unexpected, Yura said, though she was smiling. Sorry, I shouldn't have. She put a finger to his lips. Don't apologize. I wanted you to. She stepped back, composing herself. But you're right that we need to focus. After the mission. After we've done what needs doing. Then we can explore this further. If we survive. When we survive. I'm choosing optimism. She gathered her things. I need to return to the palace before dark. Send word that I'm safe and begin preparations. Can you meet me at the Eastern Service entrance at midnight? I'll be there. Bring whatever equipment you need. Once we're inside, there won't be time to retrieve anything. She paused at the door. Deho, thank you. For trusting me. For letting me be part of this. Thank you for giving me a reason to believe this mission matters beyond just following orders. After she left, Deho sat in the quiet room and thought about what had just happened. The mission had transformed from a simple intelligence-gathering operation into something much larger. He wasn't just stealing data anymore. He was helping to stop a war. He was working with someone who'd chosen to stand against her own family for the sake of what was right. And somewhere along the way, he'd started to care about her. Not as an asset or a contact, but as a person, as someone who mattered. It was the worst possible complication. It made him vulnerable, made him hesitate when he should be decisive, made him care about outcomes beyond just mission success. But it also gave him something he'd lost when he was exiled. Purpose. Not the artificial purpose of following orders, but real purpose. The kind that came from choosing to stand with someone against the darkness. The kind that made sacrifice meaningful instead of just necessary. He spent the afternoon preparing, checking his equipment, memorizing the updated route Yura had shown him, mentally rehearsing every step of the infiltration. By evening, he was as ready as he'd ever be. As midnight approached, Deho made his way through the city toward the palace. The eastern service entrance was used by maintenance workers and delivery personnel. Less guarded than the main gates, but still monitored. He watched from the shadows until he saw her. Yura arrived wearing palace robes, her royal bearing on full display. But when she saw him, her expression softened. She approached a guard at the entrance, said something in Velkari, and gestured for Deho to follow. The guard looked uncertain but didn't challenge a princess. They were inside. As the heavy door closed behind them, Yura took Deho's hand and squeezed it once. A promise, a shared commitment. They were in this together now, whatever came next. The heist had begun. But both of them knew they'd already stolen something more valuable than data from each other. They'd stolen hope from a hopeless situation, connection from isolation, purpose from exile. One night had changed everything, and the night was just beginning. Part 5. The heist. The palace was even more impressive from inside than the schematics had suggested. Walls carved from materials Deho couldn't identify stretched up into darkness. Lights that weren't quite lights glowed along corridors that seemed to shift and breathe. This was architecture built by a species that had mastered space travel before humans had invented the wheel. Yura led him through servant passages, avoiding the main halls where guards and courtiers would be moving even at this late hour. She moved with confidence, knowing exactly where to step to avoid surveillance systems and which paths would be empty at this time of night. "The archive is in the northern wing," she whispered, as they climbed a narrow staircase. "We'll need to cross through the ceremonial gallery to reach it. That's the most exposed part of our route. How many guards? Usually 4, but with the heightened alert after last night, possibly more." They reached the top of the stairs and Yura pressed her hand against a panel. It glowed purple and the door opened silently. Beyond was a massive gallery filled with statues and art from thousands of years of Velkari history. Beautiful, imposing, and very, very open. Deho scanned the space quickly. 6 guards visible, positioned at strategic points, all armed with energy weapons, all alert and watching. There was no way to cross without being seen. "Change of plans," he whispered. "We can't sneak through this. Then what do we do?" Deho thought fast. He pulled out his communication device and accessed the palace network, using codes his intelligence contact had provided. If he could create a distraction on the other side of the palace, pull the guards away from this area? No. Too risky. The distraction would alert palace security that something was wrong. They'd lock down the entire building before Deho and Yura could reach the archive. "We walk through," he said finally. "You're a princess. You have every right to be here. I'm your guest. Act like we belong and they won't question it." Yura looked nervous but nodded. She straightened her posture, put on her royal mask, and stepped into the gallery like she owned it. Deho followed half a step behind, playing the role of a visiting dignitary. The guards noticed them immediately. One spoke into his communication device. Another moved to intercept. But Yura just waved dismissively and kept walking. The sheer audacity of it worked. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to challenge a member of the royal family who was clearly going somewhere with purpose. They were halfway across when a new voice echoed through the gallery. "Sister, how unexpected." Deho's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon. Prince Taman stood at the far entrance, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards. He was tall like all Velkari, with darker skin than Yura, and eyes that held no warmth at all. "Taman," Yura said coolly, "I didn't realize you were still awake." "I've been looking for you. Father was concerned after reports of your kidnapping." Taman's gaze shifted to Deho. "And I see the reports were accurate. You are with a human. This is a diplomatic guest. I'm showing him our palace art collection. At midnight, through servant passages, while avoiding security. Taman smiled, but it was cold. Please, sister. Give me some credit. I know what you're doing. The guards had moved to surround them. Deho counted odds rapidly. 10 armed opponents in an open space with no cover. He could take maybe 3 before they cut him down. Not good. I'm not doing anything wrong, Yura said, but her voice had lost its confidence. You're working with a human spy to steal from our father. That's treason. Taman moved closer. I warned you that your progressive ideas would lead to this, that your sympathy for lesser species would make you forget your duty to our people. My duty is to prevent unnecessary war. That's more important than blind loyalty to family. And that's why you'll never be fit to rule. Taman gestured to his guards. Take them into custody. Father will decide their fate in the morning. The guards moved forward. Deho tensed, ready to fight despite the impossible odds. But before anyone could act, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Red lights flashed. Guards started shouting in Velkari. Taman touched his communication device, listened, and his expression changed from smug confidence to shock. Impossible. What's happening? Yura demanded. Human ships, dropping out of hyperspace around New Terminus. Dozens of them. Taman looked at Deho with new respect and fear. Your people are invading. Deho's mind raced. That didn't make sense. His mission was about preventing war, not starting it. Unless someone else had intelligence about the Velkari plans. Unless they'd decided a preemptive strike was necessary. Or unless this was exactly what Yura's father had wanted. A pretext to justify whatever he was planning. The palace shook. The human fleet was firing warning shots demonstrating their presence. In the confusion, the guards split their attention between the prisoners and the larger threat. It was the opening Deho needed. He moved fast, grabbed the nearest guard's weapon arm, twisted it, took the energy rifle in one smooth motion, fired twice, stunning 2 more guards before they could react. Yura grabbed his arm and they ran. Taman shouted orders, but the alarms and chaos made it hard to coordinate. Deho and Yura sprinted through corridors as guards converged from multiple directions. But the palace was in emergency mode now. Defensive systems were activating. Personnel were rushing to battle stations. In the confusion, 2 people running weren't the priority. They reached the archive entrance. Yura pressed her hand to the scanner, but it flashed red. Access denied. They've locked me out, she said frantically. Deho pushed her aside and pulled out a small device from his equipment pack. That's why I brought this. He attached the device to the security panel. It was a bypass unit, designed by human engineers specifically to crack alien security systems. It worked by brute forcing access codes thousands of times faster than any alien computer could detect. A purely human innovation that took advantage of processing speeds most species hadn't optimized for. The device hummed. 5 seconds. 10. The panel flashed green and the archive door opened. Inside was a vast room filled with data storage devices that looked like crystals suspended in some kind of energy field. At the center was the main server access point. Deho ran to it and connected his data extraction tool. How long? Yura asked, watching the door nervously. 2 minutes for a full download. Maybe less if I only grab priority files. Take everything. We might not get another chance. The download began. Outside, they could hear guards searching. Taman's voice barking orders. The palace was waking up fully now, realizing that the external threat might be connected to an internal breach. Deho watched the progress bar crawl forward. 1%, 5%, 10%. The door burst open. Guards poured in. Deho pulled Yura behind the server housing and returned fire with the stolen rifle. The energy bolts lit up the archive like a light storm. Crystals shattered. Alarm screamed. 30% downloaded. More guards. Too many. Deho's rifle was running low on charge. He couldn't hold them off much longer. 50%, we need to go, Yura shouted. Not yet. 70%. The guards were advancing, using cover and tactics. They'd stopped trying to capture and started trying to kill. Deho felt a bolt graze his shoulder. Burning pain. He kept firing. 90%. The guards were 10 meters away now. Close enough that Deho could see their expressions. See the determination. This was it. They weren't getting out. 100%. Download complete. Deho grabbed the data storage device and shoved it into his pack. Run! They ran deeper into the archive, away from the main entrance. Yura led him to what looked like a solid wall. She pressed a hidden panel and a maintenance shaft opened. "Through here," she said. They dove into the shaft as energy bolts struck the wall behind them. The shaft was narrow, barely big enough for one person. They crawled through darkness, feeling their way forward. Behind them, guards were trying to follow, but their larger builds made it difficult. The shaft led to a ventilation system, then to maintenance passages, then finally to an emergency exit that opened onto the palace grounds. They emerged into the night air, gasping and bloodied but alive. Above them, the sky was full of ships. Human warships in defensive formation around New Terminus, Velkari defense forces mobilizing in response. The two fleets facing each other in the kind of standoff that could turn into a shooting war with one wrong move. "We need to get off this planet," Deho said. "Now, I know a way. The royal family has private ships in the southern hangar, small fast vessels for emergency evacuation." Yura looked at the sky. "But we need to hurry. If those fleets start shooting, nowhere will be safe." They ran across the grounds, keeping to shadows. More alarms. More guards. The entire palace was mobilizing for war. But everyone's attention was on the sky, on the potential invasion, not on two figures fleeing through the gardens. They reached the hangar. Sure enough, there were small ships waiting. Personal craft with royal markings. Yura approached one and the access ramp lowered automatically at her biometric signature. Inside, the ship was luxurious but functional. Yura took the pilot's seat while Deho collapsed into the co-pilot's chair. His shoulder throbbed where the energy bolt had grazed him. "Can you fly this?" he asked. "I've been trained since childhood." "Hold on." The ship lifted off. Immediately, defense systems locked onto them. Warnings flashed across the control panel. Automated weapon systems preparing Part 6. The escape. The human shuttle approached through the void, a small craft breaking away from the massive warship Vanguard. Deho guided Yura's vessel toward it. His hand steady despite the exhaustion pulling at his body. His shoulder still burned where the energy bolt had grazed it, but the wound wasn't serious. He'd had worse. Around them, the standoff between human and Velkari forces continued. Both fleets held position, weapons powered but not firing. It was a tense peace, the kind that could shatter with a single mistake. "They're hailing us," Yura said, looking at her communication panel. "Velkari command. My father. Don't answer. He'll send ships after us, let him try. The human fleet won't let them through." Deho looked at her seriously. "You understand what you're doing, right? Once you board that shuttle, you're defecting. You can't go back. Not ever." Yura stared out at the stars, at the planet that had been her home, at the empire her family had ruled for centuries. Everything she'd ever known was down there. Her history, her identity, the weight of royal legacy that had defined her entire existence. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm making peace with it." The shuttle docked with their vessel. The airlock cycled and opened. A human soldier stood there in full combat armor, weapon ready but not aimed. When he saw Deho, his stance relaxed. "Thought we'd lost you," the soldier said. "Takes more than a palace full of hostile aliens to kill me, Hyun." Hyun pulled off his helmet and grinned. He was younger than Deho, with a face that still held optimism despite years of military service. "Good to see you in one piece, you stubborn fool. Command has been losing their minds trying to figure out what happened to you. Had some complications." Deho gestured to Yura. "This is Princess Yura of the Velkari Empire. She helped me complete the mission. She needs asylum." Hyun's eyes widened. He looked between them, processing the implications. "You brought a Velkari royal? An actual princess? Do you have any idea how complicated that makes things? About as complicated as starting an interstellar war, I'd guess. Which is what we just prevented." Deho moved toward the shuttle. "Come on. I need medical attention and we need to get this data to command before someone decides shooting is easier than talking." They transferred to the shuttle and detached from the royal vessel. As they accelerated toward the Vanguard, Deho saw Velkari fighters launching from the planet. They were coming after them. "We've got pursuit," the shuttle pilot announced calmly. 6 fighters. "Vector to intercept." Hyun moved to the communication console. "Vanguard, this is Shuttle Delta 7. We have hostile pursuers. Request cover." The response was immediate. 2 human fighters broke formation and streaked toward them. The Velkari fighters tried to maneuver around them, but the human pilots were aggressive, forcing them to engage or retreat. The Velkari chose retreat. They fell back toward their own fleet. Crisis averted. For now. The shuttle docked with the Vanguard, and they were escorted immediately to the bridge. Captain Exiled was waiting for them. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd commanded ships through more battles than most people would see in a lifetime. "Deho," she said. "You look terrible." "Missed you too, Captain." Her gaze shifted to Yura, assessing her with the same intensity she probably used to evaluate enemy ships. "Princess Yura, I've read your file. Progressive reformer. Third in line for the throne. Opposed to your father's militant policies." She crossed her arms, and now apparently willing to commit treason to stop him. "I did what I thought was right," Yura said, meeting the captain's stare without flinching. "That remains to be seen. Guards, take her to secure quarters, comfortable but monitored. We'll sort out her status after we deal with the immediate situation." As guards escorted Yura away, she looked back at Deho. There was uncertainty in her eyes, fear, but also trust. She was counting on him to make sure she wasn't treated as a prisoner or worse, an enemy. "She risked everything to help me," Deho said once she was gone. "Without her, this mission would have failed. We owe her consideration," Exiled corrected. "Not blind trust. She's Velkari royalty, Deho. For all we know, this is an elaborate intelligence operation on their part." "It's not. I'd stake my life on it." "You already did. The question is whether I'm willing to stake my crew on it." Exiled gestured to a medical officer. "Get that shoulder treated. Then we debrief. I want to know everything that happened down there." The medical officer led Deho to the sickbay. The treatment was quick and efficient, human medicine working to repair the tissue damage from the energy burn. Within minutes, the pain had faded to a dull ache. Then came the debriefing. Deho sat in a conference room and recounted everything. The initial surveillance, meeting Yura, the assassination attempt, their growing partnership, and finally, the infiltration of the palace and escape with the data. Exiled listened without interruption, her expression giving away nothing. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Let me summarize. You met a woman in a bar. She propositioned you. You got emotionally involved, and then you brought her into a classified mission. It's more complicated than that. It always is." Exiled rubbed her temples. "But you did get the data. That's what matters in the end. Our analysts are going through it now." She looked at him seriously. "Deho, what's on that drive could change everything. If it's what we think it is, this isn't just about preventing a war. It's about exposing a conspiracy that threatens human survival." Before Deho could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. The lights shifted to emergency red. Exiled was on her feet instantly, moving to the bridge with Deho right behind her. The main display showed the situation. The Velkari fleet had moved closer, not attacking, but surrounding the human ships in a clear attempt to trap them, and more ships were arriving, jumping in from hyperspace. The Velkari were committing serious military resources to this confrontation. "They want their princess back," the tactical officer said, "and they want whoever stole from them." "Open a channel to the Velkari flagship," Exiled ordered. The display shifted to show a Velkari commander. He was old, scarred, and looked like he'd been fighting wars since before humans left Earth. "Human vessels. This is Fleet Commander of the Velkari Imperial Navy. You are harboring a fugitive and stolen property. Return Princess Yura and the data you have taken, and we will allow you to leave peacefully. Refuse, and we will take them by force." Exiled smiled coldly. "Commander, this is Captain Exiled of the Terran Defense Force. Princess Yura has requested asylum. As for your data, it was obtained through legal means with assistance from a member of your royal family. We're not returning either." "Then you choose war." "No. You choose war by making threats instead of talking like civilized beings." Exil's expression hardened. "But if you want to fight, we're ready. Your fleet outnumbers us 3-1, but you've never fought humans before. You don't know what we're capable of when we're cornered." The Velkari commander leaned forward. "Your species is young, untested. You think you're special because you've won a few skirmishes against pirates and raiders, but you've never faced a true military power. Stand down before you learn how insignificant you really are. You want to test that theory? Go ahead." Exiled gestured, and the tactical display appeared beside her, showing both fleets. "Look at our formation. Notice anything?" The commander studied it. His expression changed slightly. "That's right," Exiled continued. "We're not positioned defensively. We're positioned for a strike. Every ship in my fleet has its weapons locked on your command vessel. The moment you fire, we fire, and our targeting systems have already calculated exactly where to hit to cripple your flagship. You'll survive, probably, but you'll be drifting in space while your fleet tries to decide who's in charge. It was a bluff, mostly. The human fleet could probably take out the flagship, but they'd be destroyed in the counterattack. But the Velkari commander didn't know that. He didn't understand human tactics or capabilities. That uncertainty was Isol's weapon. You're insane, the commander said. No, we're determined. There's a difference. Isol leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to jump to hyperspace in 60 seconds. You're going to let us go, and then we're going to share the data we obtained with the Galactic Council. Let them decide who the villain is in this story. The Council won't believe you. Maybe not, but they'll investigate. And once they see what your Emperor is planning, once they understand the scale of the conspiracy we've uncovered, they'll have no choice but to act. Isul smiled. Your choice, Commander. Let us go and deal with the political fallout, or start a war right now that will cost thousands of lives and still end with the truth coming out. The seconds ticked by. Deho watched the Velkari fleet on the tactical display, waiting for the first sign of weapons charging. But the commander was thinking, calculating, trying to decide if the risk was worth it. 30 seconds, the navigation officer announced. The Velkari fleet didn't move, didn't power up weapons. The commander was backing down. 22nd, Captain, Deho said quietly. The data. What did the analysts find? Isol glanced at him. Everything we see. 6 months had passed since the escape from New Terminus. 6 months of debriefings, political maneuvering, and watching the galaxy reshape itself around the revelations contained in the stolen data. Deho stood on the observation deck of the TDF Phoenix, watching a planet called Meridian Prime rotate slowly below. It was a human colony world, one of dozens that would have been destroyed if Yura's father had succeeded in his plans. Behind him, the door opened and Yura entered. She wore a uniform now, not the flowing robes of Velkari royalty. The uniform marked her as a special advisor to the Joint Task Force, a position that recognized her expertise without giving her command authority. It had taken months of negotiations to get even that much acceptance from human military command. Remembering why we did this? She asked, moving to stand beside him. Just thinking about what would have happened if we hadn't. Deho gestured to the planet. 3 million people down there, all of them alive because you chose to help me. We helped each other. She looked at him with those ancient eyes. I couldn't have exposed my father without you. You couldn't have completed the mission without me. That's what makes it work. The data they'd stolen had been everything the intelligence services had hoped for and more. Detailed plans for a coordinated assault on human space, alliance agreements with the Krithani Dominion that would have given them access to dozens of human worlds, lists of targets, timeline projections, and worst of all, contingency plans for the systematic elimination of entire populations. When the Galactic Council saw the evidence, they'd had no choice but to act. Economic sanctions against the Velkari Empire, demands for the removal of the Emperor from power, and most significantly, a complete restructuring of the military alliance networks that had governed the galaxy for centuries. The Velkari Empire was in chaos now. Civil war between reformists who supported Yura's actions and traditionalists who saw her as a traitor. Her father had been deposed but not arrested, protected by loyalists within the military. Her brother Taman led the traditionalist faction, using the crisis to consolidate power and push for even more aggressive expansion. I got word from the council this morning, Yura said. They're officially recognizing the reformist movement as the legitimate Velkari government. It's not much, but it's a start. Your people are still dying in that civil war. I know, and part of me feels responsible for that. She touched the window, her fingers tracing the outline of the planet below. But the alternative would have been worse. My father's plans would have killed billions. At least this way there's a chance for something better to emerge. Deho had been reinstated to the Terran Defense Corps with full honors. They'd offered him his old rank back, even suggested a promotion. He'd refused both. Instead, he'd requested assignment to a new unit being formed to deal with the fallout from the Velkari crisis, a joint task force that combined human military capabilities with the intelligence and cultural knowledge that only someone like Yura could provide. They called it Task Force Horizon. Its mission was to prevent the wars that others didn't see coming, to find the threats before they became unstoppable, and to do it by building bridges instead of just breaking enemies. "Captain wants us on the bridge," Hyun said, appearing at the door. He'd been assigned to the task force as well, serving as Daeho's second-in-command. "We've got a new mission." They made their way to the bridge. Captain Isul had been given command of the Phoenix specifically because of her role in the new Terminus incident. The military brass recognized that this new type of warfare required people who could think creatively and take risks. "We've received intelligence about a Crethani operation in the outer reaches," Isul said without preamble. "They're consolidating forces near several human colonies. Could be preparation for raids. Could be something bigger. The Crethani are testing human resolve," Yura said. "After what happened with my father's alliance plans, they're trying to determine if humans are truly capable of defending their territories, or if we just got lucky." "Thoughts?" Isul looked at Daeho. "We go in, small team. Reconnaissance and, if possible, disruption of their operations." Daeho studied the tactical display. "But we don't just gather intelligence. We send a message. Show them that humans don't back down. Risky. We don't know how many Crethani ships are in the area. That's why we use their own tactics against them. The Crethani rely on surprise and overwhelming force. They don't expect their targets to hit back before the main assault." Daeho traced a path on the display. "We go in with a small strike team, hit their forward observation posts, make them think we know more than we do, force them to reconsider the operation." Isul considered it. "You'd need to get past their sensors. Their security is better than what you faced in the Velkari Palace. Then we use what they don't expect, human unpredictability." He looked at Yura. "And Velkari knowledge of Crethani systems. Your people fought them for centuries before the Alliance." "I can help with that," Yura confirmed. "The Crethani are logical to a fault. If we can create enough chaos in their planning, they'll abort rather than risk a mission with too many unknown variables." "This is what humans do," Hyun added. "We adapt, we improvise. We turn disadvantages into advantages." Isul looked at her command staff. "This is why we formed this task force. To do things conventional military units can't or won't. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. 12 hours later, Daeho and his team dropped out of hyperspace near the target system. 4 human operators and Yura. A tiny force against an enemy installation that probably held hundreds of Crethani soldiers, but size wasn't always what mattered. They approached in a captured Crethani shuttle, using access codes Yura had helped them acquire. The Crethani sensors accepted their identification and allowed them to land at the forward observation post without challenge. The base was built into an asteroid, camouflaged to blend with the surrounding rock. Inside were sensor arrays monitoring human colony traffic, communication intercepts, and tactical planning stations for the upcoming operation. Daeho's team moved through the facility quickly and quietly. Human stealth technology was different from what other species used. Instead of trying to be invisible, they used active camouflage that confused sensors by presenting multiple false signatures. The Crethani systems didn't know how to process it. They planted explosives at key structural points, not enough to destroy the facility, but enough to cripple it and make it unusable. Then they accessed the main computer system. This was where Yura's expertise became crucial. She understood Crethani data structures, knew how their military planning systems worked. While the team provided security, she hacked into their network and planted false intelligence. Reports of human fleet movements that didn't exist, warnings about advanced weapon systems that were pure fiction, casualty projections that made any assault look suicidal. "Done," she said after 15 minutes. "When they review this data, they'll think attacking human colonies would be walking into a prepared ambush." "Time to go," Daeho said. They extracted the same way they'd entered, calm and methodical, reached their shuttle, lifted off, and once they were clear, Hyun triggered the explosives. The asteroid base erupted in carefully controlled detonations, not destroyed but definitely out of commission for months, and inside its computers was false intelligence that would take weeks to sort through and verify. "Mission success," Daeho reported to the Phoenix. "Crethani observation post disabled. False intelligence planted." "Good work," Isul responded. "Intel is already reporting Crethani fleet movements. They're pulling back from the human colonies. Looks like your message was received." Back aboard the Phoenix, the team debriefed and decompressed. It had been a textbook operation, the kind that showed what the task force could accomplish. Small, Precise. Effective. Exactly what humanity needed in this new era of galactic politics. Deho found Yura later in the observation deck, the same place they'd talked before the mission. She was staring out at the stars with an expression he recognized. Contemplation. Maybe a little melancholy. "Missing home?" he asked. "I don't know if I have a home anymore. The palace where I grew up is occupied by my brother. The empire I was born into is tearing itself apart." She turned to him. "But I don't regret it. Every time we do something like today's mission, every life we save, it justifies the choices I made." Deho moved to stand beside her. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved. The initial attraction was still there, but it had deepened into something more solid. Partnership, trust, the kind of bond that came from facing impossible odds together and surviving. "You know, for someone who said one night was too complicated for his mission, you've certainly made things exponentially more complex," Yura said with a small smile. "That's the human way, Your Highness. We don't just complete missions, we rewrite them. I'm not a princess anymore. You'll always be a princess, just one who chose to be something more." He took her hand. "You chose to be someone who makes a difference." The galaxy was changing. The old power structures were crumbling. New alliances were forming. And in the middle of it all, humanity was establishing itself not as conquerors or victims, but as something the other species had never,